I'm Scott Lucas. This is today's EA Worldview on Syria. Obama gives up the fight. Let's be very clear here. President Barack Obama has surrendered in the Syrian crisis. Of course, he didn't say this explicitly, but last Thursday, as he made a statement about Iraq, Obama inserted a passage about what should be done in the neighboring country of Syria. What he said is that the priority must now be on counterterrorism. It must be on dealing with extremist groups, not just an extremist group like the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, which is now everybody's enemy, but even an extremist group within the insurgency, such as the Islamist faction Jabhat al-Nusra. He did cite that President Assad is a bad guy, and of course, there's always the fight that has to go on against the regime. But this was secondary to his main message. The war on terror was being evoked, not to actually deal with the question of political change in Syria, but to avoid it. How the hell did we get here? Go back 18 months to the end of 2012, when the insurgency, protesters, and opposition were trying to hit back against the Assad regime, an Assad regime that was leveling cities like Homs, that was ready to level Aleppo in order to win a nominal victory. At that point, the United States was being pressed to give military aid to support the insurgency, but instead, it labeled the group Jabhat al-Nusra as a terrorist organization. Now, it's quite true that Jabhat al-Nusra is linked to al-Qaeda. They have pledged allegiance to it. But it is also quite true that Jabhat al-Nusra, while fighting inside Syria, has tried to work with other Syrian groups and communities. Therefore, if you're going to actually support the Syrian opposition insurgency, you either had to support all of it, including Jabhat al-Nusra, or you had to basically give up on it. The United States did neither. It started creating the argument that it would support a moderate Syrian opposition, that somehow you could craft a range of groups that were acceptable and split them away from those which weren't. That you could do this across the country, in the south, in the northwest, in the east, and still maintain a fight against Assad. Well, you can't. Fast forward to August 2013. A window opened up at that point. The Assad regime quite clearly killed hundreds of people with chemical weapons. The Obama administration at that point could do what some officials, say like Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, the director of the CIA David Petraeus, had argued for a year earlier: establish no-fly protected zones in parts of Syria. Of course you can't take Damascus, you can't take Aleppo, but along Syria's borders, in the northwest, in the south, you could open up spaces for local councils to operate, local councils to establish political legitimacy and protect people from being bombed by the Assad regime. Obama didn't do that. Instead, he waffled, he wavered, and then, in a wonderful U-turn, instead of dealing with the Assad regime, he said he would work with the Russians to negotiate with Assad. Give up your chemical weapons, go through a nominal process called Geneva, and everything will be okay. Well, it's not. The deaths have only escalated, the fight has only escalated, and it's going to continue to do so. When President Obama stood before people last week in the White House and said, it's all about counterterrorism, he was washing his hands of more than 3 years of Syria. It's no longer Assad that matters. It's no longer that inner circle who have been responsible for the vast majority of close to 200,000 deaths, of almost 3 million refugees, of more than 9 million people displaced within the country. Obama doesn't care about them anymore. He only cares about a nominal bogeyman, the extremist, who somehow might come back to attack the United States as well as attacking Iraq. It is the white flag. An effective U.S. policy in Syria is over. The insurgency will go on, so will the protest. But Washington is now absent from the situation. I'm Scott Lucas. This has been today's EA Worldview on Syria.